Order. Order. Well, good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for making a Monday meeting rather than our usual Wednesday and braving it through freezing fog and ice and everything else. Thank you for doing that. And it's my special pleasure this afternoon to welcome former Taoiseach Bertie Ahern. A quick trawl of the NIAC records. Bertie, tell us that you are the first either serving or former Taoiseach to ever come before this committee. So today we are, in our small way, making history, and we're very grateful that you're here, and we look forward to what you have to say. You're going to give us some opening remarks, which we look forward to hearing, and then I will throw you open to the tender mercies of the committee. But the floor is yours, sir, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for allowing me in on a Monday afternoon, which suited very fine. I want to thank you for inviting me and to the opening session of this committee and looking at the effectiveness of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And I suppose as we approach the 25th anniversary of this historic agreement, I believe reflection on the past is important, and we should also highlight the important potential that remains to be explored for the people of Northern Ireland. The agreement, which established the promise of an island that offered perpetual peace through consensus, and that consensus was brought about through a mutual respect and shared commitment to make people's lives better. It created a process that has delivered an incalculable benefit to both of our islands in terms of reduction of violence, deaths, and also here in Britain and in Ireland. And the generations who are now growing up, I think, in an environment of an imperfect but perpetual peace are the real treasures that this agreement has brought to this point, in my view. I continually say that we should hold this generation up as our greatest triumph, and far from criticising them as a generation that do not remember and therefore will never understand the troubles, we should celebrate them as our singular success. For only if we continue to be successful as civic leaders in continuing on the commitment of the agreement can we ensure that they do not have to witness the horrific acts of violence that scarred both our past. And we all have, I think, an ongoing responsibility to continue to ensure that this generous pathway in life is a perpetual peaceful one. Beyond, Chairman, the personal, social and political changes the process has delivered, other benefits too, through a growing prosperity and improved quality of life as a direct result. And while it's impossible to put a single number on the scale of the peace dividend, the results are clear. The peace, the consequent stability which has followed the agreement of 25 years ago allowed for greater prosperity right across the island of Ireland. The peace dividend has been witnessed by Irish business north and south for the last 2.5 decades in substantial ways that have benefited our ability to invest not just on our own island but also globally. And the growing commercial, cultural and social ties across the island of Ireland continue to offer the promise of an all-island economy, which is not only politically stable but economically strategic, offering growth of employment and prosperity across the entire island. North-South cooperation to develop trade, critical energy, transport skills, supply chain and important regulatory regimes have all been enhanced because of the working relationships formed out of the agreements, which are at times forgotten in the heat of political discourse. But it is the drumbeat that continues to offer the tangible proof that together we are better. Business have long recognised that North-South opportunities of mutual benefit. It's now 31 years since Sir George Quigley at the Confederation of Irish Industry conference promoted the idea of an all-island economy. He suggested that following the creation of the single market, the European community should regard the island of Ireland as one economic area and support the idea of developing the Dublin-Belfast economic corridor. And following the ceasefires, the agreement, it became increasingly possible to explore and deliver on those opportunities of mutual benefit. The agreement, Chairman, has allowed universities and firms across the island to collaborate more closely through their research and development programmes supported by EU funding. It's created greater employment opportunities with the chance to seamlessly work in one jurisdiction and live in the other. And the creation of high quality employment opportunity would help to further raise the standard of living across jurisdictions as economic conditions improve. And as our world shifted during the pandemic, borders and barriers have never seemed less redundant. But making the island a more attractive place to live and work, a more stable place to invest, for allowing the growth of an all-Ireland trade and brands by integrating infrastructure in key areas, the island has benefited economically from peace, although Northern Ireland has still to realise the full potential dividend, in my view. Whilst that peace dividend is significant, there remains opportunities of mutual benefit which Northern Irish and the Irish business community will continue to pursue in the coming decades. Peace on the island, underpinned by the agreement, has been central to prosperity and the success of many businesses, and business must therefore play a central role in the further development of an island economy which has the evolving principles at its core. Looking back should not prevent us from looking forward to the promise that a perpetual peace can deliver even more for our island, and I think we can assess the successes to date and acknowledge what did not work in the manner that we had hoped. I know your committee chairman wanted to tease this out, and I suppose the obvious areas to look at is, I think we have made so much progress in the equality agenda. I think we've made so much progress in everyday life and tourism and investment, but the institutions of the agreement unfortunately have been down as much as been up, and we're in that position today for numerous reasons. First of all, it was decommissioning for a long period of time, decommissioning of arms. Then it was cash for ash, which delayed it. Now it's protocol, and these difficulties have meant that unfortunately the institutions, the executive, the assembly in the north have now been redundant for almost a year. The north-south bodies have been up and down, and again very little happening, and thankfully recently east-west has got back on track, but that also suffered. So I think these are the pitfalls, but I think looking, if I can say to your committee, I don't want us to think that the 25 years has been about the protocol. So much has been gained, so much has been achieved, so much prosperity. I spent a lot of my life at Queen's, and you see a whole vibrant young community, both local and national and international, thriving, bringing new ideas and a whole new way of life to the island of Ireland. So I think we have to take all these things into account when we consider marking the start of a new dawn, a dawn which, rather than simply appreciates peace, that this is a generation dedicated to demanding a perpetual peace for all of us.
Thank you. That was a good sort of scene setter. You said in the opening of your opening remark about the mutual respect which had effectively led up to the signing of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. There was also that political bravery and leadership amongst the parties, both north and south, and indeed in Westminster, which I think can easily be attributed to, or in great part attributed to, there was a very living, real-time memory of the horrors of the troubles and the disruption and the blood and the death and the maiming, etc. And that did require political leadership and bravery. Do you think that's still there, or have politicians become a little less brave and show a little less leadership? And allied to that is, do you think the Good Friday Agreement would have been possible had social media and the siren voices of social media been around?
Well, sometimes I think, Chairman, nothing is possible in the past if social media had been around. But, it definitely would have made life very difficult. But I do think there were a group of politicians across both nationalist, Republican, Unionist and Loyalist communities that were prepared to work incredibly hard to try and see if we could get compromise. Some of those had been doing that for decades, like John Hume, who didn't really change his message for 30 years. I mean, he was saying the same things when I was leaving school as he was saying when I was sitting across the table from him. I think they were incredibly, Chairman, I've ended up a great friend of David Trimble and the late David Trimble, and he made incredibly brave decisions. I mean, he could have not went into the talks in the first place. He could have walked out of the talks when other unionist parties walked out. When some of his own party walked out, he could have given up the ghost. So I think on a number of times he was prepared to keep going forward. And then when decommission came such a difficult issue for him and everybody else, he still stayed in. So, but I think across the area, we had people that were prepared to work hard, whether they were from any of the political parties. And they were prepared to, from 1991, I mean, I look back to 1991 when we had the all-party talks in 1991. It wasn't that we solved anything, but, for the first time, I understood what people wanted rather than what they didn't want. I grew up in an age where I knew what everyone didn't want in Northern Ireland, but I wasn't sure what they wanted. And 1991-92 gave us kind of the position papers of where it was possible to build consensus, and with the commitment that Prime Minister Tony Blair was prepared to put in, the late Mo Molan, all the parties in the multi-party talks, then I think we were able to make business. If you ask me today, I think the same political leaders of a new generation are around, but what has created so much problems for them are things outside of their own control. I don't want to come before this committee to say anything about the rights and wrongs of Brexit, but they've created huge problems for 6 solid years now. And it's, whether it was the backstop, which we had for a few years, whether it was the protocol, whether it was the withdrawal agreement, and who said what, and you all know the issues. But that has been very testing. And the difficulty for the parties in Northern Ireland today is they don't control that position. They don't control the British government policy on it, and they don't control the European Union policy on it. And that makes life difficult. Of course, they've all views on it, but ultimately they can't settle that issue.
You mentioned, in answer to that bit of the question, sort of compromise, which suggests sort of pragmatism and the give and take of negotiation. Do you think we've gone through a rather sort of peculiarly populist period of politics, haven't we? Where compromise and pragmatism and give and take have almost been sort of terms of abuse and dirty words. Do you fear that might have become endemic, and therefore looking to the future makes things far harder?
Well, Chairman, I've always felt that politicians can opt to be on the side of not finding solutions because sometimes it's safer, to do that. You're saying I'm against because invariably when you compromise, it means that there will be one group that say you were wrong to compromise, another group will say that was the right thing to do. Where if you don't make any decision, well, they'll all say yes, you're wrong or you're right.
Sure.
So I think I watch serious compromises. I watched all of the parties in the north, whether it was Gerry Adams, Martin McGuinness, whether it was the unionist leadership, my friends in the alliance, whether it was people that were like Seamus Mallon, who would be always trying to forge and was prepared to compromise. That you had people that were very strong about that. I do worry I do worry that sometimes people, if you don't make a decision, you can't be criticised too much.
Yes. The buck seems to stop nowhere.
Yeah, it's when you make a decision, and I've been victims of this most of me 40 years of political life, that when you make a decision, you can be assured you're not going to get a unanimous view, and sometimes people don't make that decision. But in the case of Northern Ireland, we're talking about a divided society still. We're talking about divided communities still. So therefore, the only way that the system can work is compromise. Because if you come down on one side or the other, then you're alienating a whole community. So to make progress in Northern Ireland, it has to be based on compromise. And I know what you mean by compromise is a bad word, but in the case of Northern Ireland, a compromise, in my view, is the sign of strength, sure, leadership, building for the future, because it's the only way that Northern Ireland will work for the foreseeable future is based on good compromise.
You referred there to Northern Ireland being a divided society still, with the emphasis on the word still. And for many, I think, and I'm sure we welcome your thoughts on this, I'm always keen to point out to people that the Belfast Good Friday Agreement started a process. It wasn't a freestanding event. It wasn't the sort of 10 Commandments coming down from on high, and that was it, always to be revered. But I worry now and wonder whether there's a whole generation who just take that golden prize of peace as a given in Northern Irish society without realising the intrinsic link between that and the Good Friday Agreement and how we should still value that prize of peace. So your thoughts on whether it's been an event and not enough of a evolutionary organic process, because many of us will have heard, both in this committee and in meetings in Northern Ireland, there's a little bit of it's not quite what has the Romans ever done for us, but just as the Brexit debate was, well, we don't see the benefits to our everyday life of the single market and free movement and so on and so forth, because that's not our world, that's not our economy, that's not our community societal base. There are a lot in the loyalist community who would say, I don't see the benefits of this Good Friday process. I don't see, it hasn't changed the dial in my opportunity circle. We can see these good jobs coming in from American investment and IT and fintech and pharma, etc. We've seen the deindustrialisation of parts of Northern Ireland. That's left us sort of slightly stranded, and we seem to be separate from this process. Why should we vest any of our goodwill and our energies towards that if we're left behind? What would you say to that community?
Well, I've huge sympathy and respect for the loyalist communities. I should quickly say there are many nationalist communities that have not benefited greatly either. I met some people from Derry yesterday that feel even under the recent funds that none of it went at that end of the province. So, but I do understand the loyalist communities, and I do understand that whatever we do, into the future, we have to be trying to invest through education, through training, through skills development, and trying to attract more in the industry. And I've continually said it's the international view of the world that they want to see places that are safe, that are peaceful, that are open to investments. And I continually say to loyalist people that this is where we need to work. I mean, we need to work hard that the peace dividend is seen into some of their communities, because I totally accept that they feel that they haven't got their fair share. And I think this, Chairman, as much as anybody, but Part of the difficulty is that it hasn't been as easy to maybe attract investment into some places. 25 years ago, since I offered David Trimble that we would amalgamate the IDA in the south and invest Northern Ireland so that we could promote investment. Well, I understand why that wasn't possible, but I do think I've been involved in most of my life trying to get investment into the south, and it's international investment, whether it comes from the rest of the UK or whether it comes from Europe or comes from America. And I think that's an issue we have to help with loyalism with, and we have to help it, with education as well, and not for a second saying that there's not very educated people in Lives communities, but you have to be able to attract these companies by showing that the skills are there, and I think that's very much a question that still we have to work hard on.
We've discussed that quite a lot around this committee table about that. Always the perpetual need to stress the importance of education, given the requirement of modern jobs, both now and going forward. Jim Shannon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. You're very welcome. It's nice to see you. I don't think we've ever met over the years, but it's nice to meet you today. I want to ask a generic question. I want to give you a speculative interpretation, and I want to quote someone who you work with in relation to the agreement, and then I'm going to ask you a question if I can. That sounds a bit convoluted, but you'll get the idea when we get along the way. The question is there sufficient knowledge within the body politic of both Britain and Ireland of the Belfast and Good Friday Agreement? That's the question. Speculation in the press back home today is that the EU and the UK could be coming to some sort of agreement in relation to the protocol bill. I would suggest that if that's correct, and if it ignores the unionist bloc and the largest party, which of course I'm a member of, I think then it would be a step in the wrong direction. It would go against, in my opinion, Bertie, what the Good Friday Agreement was trying to achieve, where both political sides were together in a political process to try and move forward. And the chairman has hit upon it, and he's absolutely right about the perspective of, if that speculation is correct, that government could then take it a stage further and go over the heads of the unionist bloc in totality and bring a different process, political process, which would ignore unionism, forward. That's a speculation in the press, provincial press back home today. It certainly would raise much passion and fire amongst the unionist community that I represent, and which I'm very, very strongly of that tradition. And I'll just quote what you said, yourself said. It says, and this is back in the day following the agreement being announced, and you said, and just quote this one sentence: with the full political statement, a settlement now about to be implemented, we have the strongest possible basis for permanent peace in the country, such as never before have experienced in our history. All that, at this moment in time, that peace that you referred to, the peace that we all want, is very much hanging upon where this government goes in relation to the EU and the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. Well, yeah.
He said it.
Yeah. So, former Prime Minister Sir Tony Blair launched a series of recommendations last June about solving the protocol issue, and you worked closely with them. I wouldn't agree with everything Sir Tony Blair says, far from it, but I find it interesting when he said that the EU and the UK should, and I quote him, should show maximum flexibility in order to reach an agreement over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Tony Blair was a key architect, like yourself, in 1988 alongside, and the next element of his statement in the past, in the part he would like to take your perspective on, and I quote him again, he said, it is not a matter of technical work, but political will and leadership. So you got the speculation in the press, you got the fact from Tony Blair. Do you agree with Tony Blair that technical talks will not solve the problem? It will require political generosity from Brussels?
I do. I totally agree, because the technical talks are necessary to protect the single market, and I can understand the technical talks around that. But I've said this in Brussels, at committee meetings in Brussels, The people involved in these talks, which is the European Union and the British government, British officials, they have to understand the unique position of Northern Ireland if you find a solution. And if you don't understand the unique position of Northern Ireland, then I don't think you can solve the position. And I don't expect the European Union to throw out the single market. In fact, it was the United Kingdom government really made the single market. I mean, they were the main architects in 1987 to the single market, so the United Kingdom understand it better than anybody else. But the reality is, and I don't for a minute, by the way, think that a solution that bypass unionists, ignores the party you would support, the community you would support, is the solution to this. I mean, that's not the solution. Is to find a compromise that we can all move on. Now, neither do I think that the 7 points that have been thrown up all have to be resolved, because I think some of them would be probably possible. But there comes the compromise. But if Europe and the UK understand the fundamental issues, that there is such a thing as a UK internal market that must live beside a single market, and that there's unique differences, and you have to find a solution to that. That's the way out of this. I do not believe, and you've probably heard and read me saying this for a long time, I do not believe that's impossible, but it does require some compromise. But I wouldn't read too much into the reports back home today either that we're very close to in the EU and UK solution. My information, which isn't as perfect as it used to be one time, is not that we're not that close. I mean, there are still difficulties. So let's be clear: unionist concerns cannot be railroaded. That would be stupid. The demands of unionism can't be fully adhered to in the 7 points, because I think they should be all answered. But I don't see how you can answer all those points. And it is a matter of persuasion for both sides. Now, can I just add this, Chairman, if I can? If we don't get compromise in that, and if the UK government, as the primary leaders of the discussions, along with the EU, then we run into a position where for the longer term, and I'm not talking about the next British general election, because I don't think that solves the problem. Whoever wins or loses, that's not my business. But for the longer term, we haven't got a solution, and we don't have institutions. There lies the problem. So in the absence of compromise, we're building a future that will be on quicksand, and that's my concern. So I am 100% for compromise, 100% for trying to accommodate the concerns of people, but I do not think we can long finger this, and I'm not talking about April, that's not the issue. We can't long finger this into the dim and distant future. That would be a grave mistake.
Yeah, I think that, sorry, just very quickly on the point of and I appreciate your answer, thank you so much. I think it would be unwise of any government, whether here in the Republic or in the EU, to ignore the significant block of unionism and their opinion. And that an opinion is mandated by the people on those parties to stand strong. So I suppose I did mention it just gently, but I do feel that if unionism is ignored, then the fires of that anger will be detrimental for not just for this process, but for Ireland North and South.
Yeah, I think well, except I read it wrong, I have heard nobody on the island of Ireland, north or south, saying that the solution to this is to ignore union's public opinion, or to ignore the concerns of unionism. People might take issue with whether these things are constitutional or whether they're not, and I would probably do that. But that's not the issue. The issue is that we must find an accommodation as far as possible that can everyone moving forward in a win-win position, and that has to be the challenge. And I've said this to Stefan Kukovic, and I've said it to to others, and I think it's what the Irish government have been saying, certainly in recent weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'd say on the implicit point is, I said it's ex cathedra, which then means I can't be questioned by anybody, is we all appreciate on these issues passions and beliefs and commitments run very strong and very deeply. But pray to God that fires of violence and everything else do not reignite, because that would be such a bad step. And if anybody, if we've all learned anything, surely it's the exercise of peaceful democracy and protest. But to hold people to ransom by threats of X, Y, or Z is not how we do politics in 2023 anywhere in the United Kingdom. Claire Hannah.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much. It's good to see you here. I wanted to talk about review potentially of the structures. Obviously, the agreement itself had the possibility of a review plumbed in, and that was the pretext of the changes at St Andrews, for better or worse. But both governments seem quite averse to an open review at the moment. I don't know whether you think that's perhaps concerns about a run on the agreement, the way the politics are at the moment, and I wonder what you think would be the best approach to a review. And obviously in a context where all three strands are functioning would be the best place to start that discussion, but if that isn't the case, and for example the standing orders of Strand 1 themselves are holding the agreement down, how might we initiate and conduct an inclusive review like that in the coming months?
I think it's Chairman, sometimes people say the Good Friday Agreement, the way it was negotiated, the way it's written and signed by Tony Blair and I, that you can't change it, so therefore if something isn't working, that it's scrap it, and nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, the review clause was built in. I remember well the discussions with the great Senator Mitchell saying that it had to be in, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was a review every year, and that was my thought. 2006, October 2006 was the last review. So my preference, if it was my call today, which it's not, would be that the review would take place when the institutions are up and stable. But there is no reason why in general discussions or negotiations that the review cannot cover those points. I mean, it would be wrong for anyone to think that a review of an agreement that's so important and so wide scale as the Good Friday Agreement cannot be looked at every now and again. And 25 years on, I have no difficulty. I mean, and there's probably several areas that I can think of that could be looked at. But I would prefer it. The difficulty about a review is this, that everyone has to agree. Because of the way we built the whole agreement, if you have a review and people don't agree, then they can stop it progressing, and that's part of the problem. And it means it's more challenging. But if the institutions were up and running, I think it's easier to do that. To do it as part of trying to get the institutions up and running would probably mean that you'll have red lines all over the place. But anyway, I'm not ruling it out. I just think that's the difficulty. But the idea of a review, and let's be frank about it, and I should say it straight, Chairman, it's both disappointing and unsatisfactory that we've had the institutions stopped and stalled for, let's blame nobody or blame everybody if we want, but we haven't been able to run it. So therefore, how could anyone sit here and say you shouldn't have a review to look at some of these issues? They have to be looked at. The next 25 years, we want to see institutions that are continuous. It's not good in the democratic, because I can't think of another country in the world that has institutions that have been down more up than Northern Ireland, and that's not good. And that's not good for investment. It's not good for the people. It's not good for anybody. So a review is something that has to look at, why do we reach those issues. But I can't see a way out of having a review that doesn't have agreement. That's the problem.
It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation.
Yes.
I suppose that I know colleagues are going to pick up on some of those structures and whether, whatever the flaws, there were any alternatives to get us from the place we were at 1998. But briefly, if we aren't, and hopefully we are, if we aren't in a scenario where the strands are functioning, and I suppose the AECR committee should have been a forum to do a lot of this for the last 15 years, but it hasn't. The Assembly hasn't chosen to reform itself in that way. Do you think there is a useful scenario where the governments can convene, maybe using the 25th anniversary, an inclusive review, but one that may have to, I suppose, those who have vetoes and don't want to part with them, can you see a scenario where they will have to be overridden if we're locked up?
Well, I think if we're getting nowhere, I wouldn't rush into it. But if we were getting nowhere, then I mean the alternatives are fairly stark. Looking at the review, but I just want to repeat, I have no problems whatever with reviews, very regular reviews. I mean, it's like standing orders in parliaments all over the world are forever changed. So that's really what a lot of it is. They're just standing orders.
They are, and I think if the principles are protected, I think colleagues are also going to pick up later on strand 2. But one of the consequences of that not functioning is that essentially we are dealing with what in the terms of 98 would have been called an internal solution, and I'm not confident that even the SDLP would have signed up to the agreement without north-south mechanisms within it that we don't currently have. Obviously, again, Plan A is getting those back up and running, but the political context that we're in between Brexit and I suppose devolution being withheld are, as you know, causing and prompting a lot of people maybe who haven't considered a new Ireland before to do that. Do you think we are on the page enough, and are there useful contexts and conversations that we should properly be having to prepare and manage the conversation around constitutional change over the next years and decades?
Well, there is no doubt, just to take your questions, I mean, there's no doubt that the SDLP would not have signed up. You'll remember that the last week, Strand 2 was one of the central issues, and John Hume and Seamus Mallon would not have recommended to your party if there wasn't a strong Strand 2. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Would I make the constitutional changes in the south if there was no Strand 2? I think the answer to that is no as well. So therefore Strand 2 is absolutely vitally important. I mean, it was a fundamental part of the agreement, and the people, when they signed and it was voted on, it was probably one of the ones that was spoken as much in the referendum 22nd of May 1998 for the referendum itself. And I suppose the last part of your question was, there wouldn't have been an agreement in 1998 if there wasn't the aspiration. It was built on two things. It was built on consent, but it was also built on that there would be an aspiration to look at a new Ireland. And there is, at last, we've been talking about it since 1921, but at least there is some proper work going on, mainly led academics by Royal Irish Academy and Notre Dame University and other universities are now looking at what does it mean. Now, can I quickly say, Chairman, I don't advocate us moving to referendums before an ask until two things happen. One, that the institutions are up and running for a prolonged period. And don't ask me to find prolonged period. Prolonged period. And the second one is that the groundwork has been done. Having a referendum for the good of it is a waste of space. So they're the two things that have to happen. So the concept of an early referendum, in my view, doesn't arise.
Thank you. Robin Walker.
Thank you very much. You alluded earlier to the bravery of late Lord Trimble and the bravery that it took for a number of parties to reach a decision. You also talked about wanting to avoid a situation where there were red lines all over the place. I mean, it's worth recalling that in the run-up to the agreement, there were red lines all over the place, and many of those red lines were crossed. What do you think were the specific circumstances that allowed different parties with those red lines to actually reach compromises and to change their positions? And do you think there are any lessons to be learned from that for the current situation, say with the protocol, but also with legacy and other issues where there are some very firm red lines on?
Yeah, well, the protocol we kind of mentioned, the legacy issue, all the parties in the island of Ireland are all on the one page, which is, I can tell you, very unique. But anyway, that's where that is. But I think, the big thing that was in front of us in 1998 was that this was an opportunity to stop the violence once and for all. And by and large, that's been successful with a few notable, terrible events. But by and large, it has been very successful. And I think that was the issue where people were able to say, if this is a fair compromise, if this has taken all the big issues, and Tony Blair and I decided 7 or 8 months out that the best way of dealing with this was to have one go at it, and to deal with everything and not dodge things. Of course, it's always easier to dodge a few things, but we said, let's put down policing, let's put down prisoners, let's put down decommission. Now, we didn't find solutions to them all on the day, but we never believed that the 10th of April 1998 was the end of it. I mean, George Mitchell said on that final day, now you have the agreement, now the work starts. So it was always, considered. And I think people said, well, this is fair. There are issues in this for everybody. And okay, the Democratic Unionist Party didn't agree at that time, but then we came back to the review and St Andrews and they agreed, and it didn't fundamentally change. There were changes. So I think there was a great spirit, and there were, if I can say so, and it's not to cast any aspersions on any politicians today, but there were very feisty politicians there who've been at this for a long time, and they've been through horrendous times, and they'd spent their lives going to funerals, and they condemning acts of violence till they ran out of vocabulary of what they could say about them, and they came to the conclusion that this wasn't perfect, but that this was fair, and that we could sign up to this and stand up behind it. That was a brave move by them all. A great admiration for them all, and it was it was tough decisions, but it wasn't that any of them thought it was perfect, and if they did, it wouldn't have worked. There had to be a sense that I'm giving a bit here, but I'm taking a bit there, and I dealt with them for hours and hours and for months in advance, and you began to see that they were up to a fair compromise. Now, did everyone honour everything that they said they'd honour exactly the same as they did? Well, the answer to that. But at least it was, we got there, even if it took several years.
And it's an interesting point, and it relates to a point you made earlier about the reviews being an important part of the process as well. Is, of course, the agreement wasn't designed to settle everything. It was very much designed to open up a process and move on from that. I mean, I just wonder, there is a particular challenge, I think, when it comes to negotiations on or around the protocol. In the UK, pressed the EU very hard over many years to make sure any agreement it signed was checked to the nth degree and went into absolute legal detail. And now we're in a position of asking for a degree of compromise, and that is institutionally challenging, I think, for both sides. Obviously, with the common travel area, we had something which was in place, had been in place for a very long period of time, which was challenging to justify on a purely legal basis, but which I think at the start of the process of negotiations we were able to have very clear pressure from both the Irish and the British government that this should be protected and maintained, and that the EU signed up to straight away without that level perhaps of detailed scrutiny. Is there something to be taken from that discussion that can apply to solving the challenges on the protocol?
Well, there is. I think the chairman, earlier on, put that question. If you want to find a solution to this that's purely related to the strictures of the single market and is regulatory 100% and technically 100%, then we're not going to solve this. That's my sense of it. We're going to have imagination that allows for the UK internal market. I mean, I'd like to be fair in these arguments. I mean, I can't explain to a person in the unionist community that if something comes from Manchester and it comes into Bangor, that isn't the UK internal market, and that's different from the single market. So if the EU say, well, no, that's the single market, well, I think then we can't solve it. But I do really believe that this isn't rocket science. I mean, when you think of the things that we've resolved, we got the IRA to decommit their arms. We released prisoners, some of them, and I did sign my name to orders of people who had killed policemen and got out for 40 years. We reformed the old RUC to now a very competent international PSNI. That we can't find a way of working out how sausages and rashers will work in the internal market. I mean, it's beyond comprehension. I think there has to be a solution that is unique to Northern Ireland. And of course, I can understand if an official dealing with this and looking at what Regulation 116354 says on the document, that maybe some other country will object. Well, I meet a lot of ambassadors. I don't hear any confident argument by any of them why we shouldn't do that. So, but it is a bit of a problem. I mean, I always, when I went to meetings in Brussels, and I spent almost over 25 years going between Social Affairs Council, the ECOFIN Council, and the European Council for 12 years, I used to have one legal official, and I always was very envious of the fact that you guys always had about 40. But so I do understand how legally. I do wonder. And my one was never up to your 40. But anyway, it is a difficulty. But I think in this case, EU officials understand the history of Northern Ireland well enough to know that it has to be a bit different. And if it's not the unique circumstances, then how will we solve it? So I hope people see that. Now, can I add to that but quickly, because someone take this one bit and not the other bit. If somebody from the unions community or elsewhere wants to say, well, we have to win all 7 tests and everything has to be done on the EU side, that won't find an agreement either. You're not going to get the EU to do that. So I think we're back to where we were.
What about 6 of those 7?
Sorry?
What about 6 of those 7?
I don't think we should open a Dutch auction on that, but I think we should ask Mr. Walker if he's finished his question.
I'm happy with that.
Thank you, in which case we'll turn to someone about that.
Well, thank you. Well, listening carefully to your answers, Mr. Ahern, I think what you're telling us is that with imagination and leadership, that anything's possible. And I just want to come back to the time, not so much, actually the immediate time prior to the signing of the agreement in April 1998. And we know about the involvement of Senator Mitchell and the Mitchell Principles and how from 95-96 he helped, in effect, set the framework, brought all the relevant parties, including Sinn Féin, were able to come to the table. But in those last days, as we led up to Good Friday, how important was his role? And in particular, his famous setting of a deadline, which, of course, we slightly overran, but into Good Friday, but which we all remember as quite a seminal moment in the. So it's now or never moment for everybody concerned. How How would you assess his role now, and what lessons can be learned from that for today's circumstances?
Well, I think the deadline, if I remember correctly, it was the alliance leader at the time who actually said we should set a deadline, because as often happens, the lines were in the middle, and they were looking at both sides. So the alliance leader said, let's set a date, and I think George Mitchell, in fairness to him, he was getting to the stage where he was getting a bit fed up as well, and he had his wife and baby back home and wanted to get out. So, but it did help to focus, because you do go around in circles. Though I suppose it's a bit different now. I know if I was to say now, the deadline has to be such, people say, oh, it's better that we get a full solution. So, I'm quite happy if this takes a week or a month or 3 months. I mean, the main thing is that we get an agreement that people can live by and that we can move on. That's the main thing. But I do think, initial question, was George Mitchell an honest broker in the middle with international credibility, and saying, listen, we have to do this? Was somebody in the middle? I'm not sure who's in the middle of the EU and the UK. So I think if that's your point, it is a dilemma, because if they keep batting back and forward for however long, but ultimately you do need somebody to say, check.
Yeah.
Is there a role here?
Well, I was going to ask, actually, can I ask it?
Yes.
Is there a role for George Mitchell of 2023
I was
to come in now? I mean, Senator Mitchell now is still, sadly he's physically quite immobile, but he the lessons that he imparts, he still talks a lot about dispute resolution, are incredibly powerful. I've heard him myself, speak so eloquently on it. Do you think there's a role for somebody now like him of similar stature?
Robert, I was going to whether, because President Biden has just appointed a new US envoy to Northern Ireland, given the state's historic interest in the politics of the island of Ireland, do you see a role for him as a way of sort of acting as an honest broker between?
Well, I think the envoy that they've appointed is I think primarily to deal with trade and investment.
Yes.
So it's slightly different, which I think that's a very important role, because back to what we said earlier on about bringing in more investment and trade, and that's crucially important. But I do, somewhere in the debate between the UK government and the EU, you have to come to a position, say, call it, and I really worry that if that gets into totally legalese, I don't know how you can call it, because it'll just become and you can see where the arguments are. I mean, the arguments are the single market is built on a set of legal principles and regulations. Right. We understand that. And the protocol itself is based, part of the withdrawal agreement, which is based on legal principles. But somewhere you have to say. I mean, to be honest, Andrew, even as we talk about today, and I've been through this in my head so many times, I cannot see, Chairman, that we're dealing with, the impossible. With a bit of flexibility. And a bit of uniqueness. I accept that if you move off legalese, that this can be resolved.
Robert?
Well, just to say, I mean, I'm a lawyer, I'm afraid. I have to plead guilty. And this ultimately does seem to be a conflict of laws issue. But you're saying that to look at it as sort of dry words on a page isn't really going to be enough if we're going to reach a long-lasting solution. Am I right? I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
yeah, I mean, if you base it, I mean, single market is, been built up, and the whole European Union is based on. Yeah. You know better than I do. It's everything is a legal base.
Yeah.
You could argue that the protocol and the withdrawal agreement is almost the same, because again that was across all the legal hands. But the Good Friday Agreement isn't based on that. The Good Friday Agreement is based on bringing divided communities and to bring the John Hume hearts and minds together about a fair compromise where everybody is prepared to share. That's not legally based. That's based in a different way, and I think that's what you need.
Thank you. Okay, done?
Yes.
Claire, you just want to be very, very briefly.
Robert's initial question was about deadlines, and you referred to some of those periods of delay in the early years, particularly around decommissioning and signing up to the rule of law. Jonathan Powell, who's coming to see us in a couple of weeks as well, said a few years ago, in retrospect, we should have been willing to be a bit tougher. Do you think there was damage sustained to the culture of how we did things, and a bit of a moral hazard created in allowing deadlines to slip all the time, and I suppose allowing parties to say that they were still acting, and upholding the agreement while disregarding parts of it? Did some of that culture seep in early?
Yeah, it did. It did, and let's be honest. If all the commitments in the early, particularly after the signing, after the vote, after the Omagh bombing in particular, I mean, I thought after the Omagh bombing that was the time to deal with decommissioning and to get it finished. But unfortunately, Tony Blair and I spent months and hours and weeks and ends until 2003 to get to that stage. And that led to the early years of the disruption. I would have loved to find a way, and to this day I'd still like to find a way that you can have institutions where everyone agrees but nobody can bring them down. Easier said than done, but I think you do need we can't, as we go forward and to the next review, we have to find a way that this can't be stop-start. It's not in anybody's interest, because then you're asking people, and let's not blame either side because a number of people have been involved in this, but you can't ask people to vote for an institution that's going to be moribund for the next period. I mean, it's bad democracy, and it leads to difficulty. So we are where we are, but I think we have to try and find solutions that don't have us back in that position.
Stephen Farry.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Taoiseach. I think at the start it's worth just reflecting back on Good Friday week itself. You've made some references to the deadline, but I think it's also important that we recognise it was also a very difficult week for you personally with your mother, so we appreciate the sacrifices you made just to get things over the line in that particular regard. I wanted to talk about some of the detail around particularly Strand 1. There is some degree of controversy around the use of designations in the voting system, and also the use of the Hunt for forming the executive. Could I maybe ask you to set the background as to why that particular model was chosen, as some people regard as a very rigid form of consocialism, if I get that big word out, and what other alternatives were considered at that time?
Yeah, I think the reason we went for that in that system, we thought that the main parties could live with that, and that the smaller parties didn't love it, as you recall, sure, at the time, and we rolled on, I think, on the basis of the support that the larger parties would probably carry this go forward. Though I did realise at the time that we were going to have problems, and you remember in your own party that and you were very, very helpful in your party in changing designations to try and at various times get
it was very controversial at the
time. I can understand it being very controversial, but it was it was us trying to find ways forward, and I think you probably sacrificed some support in trying to do that at the time. But that was why we were. It was very much trying to get people used to living together. And there were alternatives, but it wasn't possible to get any of those across the line.
Now, we were a smaller party once, and obviously Alliance has done slightly better in more recent elections, and there's now 18 MLAs, 17 Alliance, and 1 People Before Profit who don't call themselves either Unionist or Nationalist. Do you feel that reality now produces a tipping point where reform, particularly the voting system, does need to be considered in the near future to ensure that for example, that there is proper equality of votes? Presumably, there will be few parliaments elsewhere in the world that would tolerate a situation where there's a second-class type of MP or TD. Well,
you're now in the position that those parties that were against the change at that time. So I think you've clearly a strong hand now, because if it had been those figures at the time, you would have been on the other side of that argument.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So we look forward to potential change in that regard. And also around executive formation, do you see the potential for some move away from the very rigid military coalition towards perhaps a form of coalition formation that would be more akin to what you see in other European countries, albeit with maybe a higher threshold for support?
Yeah, I believe if I had been here 25 years ago, I would have thought that within a 10-year period we would be in a position where there would be an opposition. Though we tried that, and some parties tried that along the way, that didn't really work either. But we thought that it would grow that way. I'd be a bit slow to try that just immediately, because it might just prove it more difficult to get the institutions open. Maybe not, but I think to carry the day. At the time, Tony Blair and I believed that the only way you were going to deal with the big issues, like say at that time the implementation of patent, if there had been an opposition and a government type arrangement, would we got some of those things through? Would we got the Equality Acts through? Like people forget now, Chairman, just the huge changes that have happened. I mean, the equality agenda changed, the parity of steam, the legislative system on most issues to do with justice have changed. But the ombuds legislature, I mean, there are I think 15 or 16 major changes that happened apart from institutional changes, and I think probably you needed everybody in government, so to speak, to achieve that. A bit different now, I think. Maybe different now.
Back to you, Chair.
Can I just clarify one thing? Just if there were to be changes to executive formation, which is you can create an argument on both sides of that. Would you still think it important that the need to ensure that there was unionist political representation as much as nationalist political representation was there as part of the coalition? I mean, in essence, it does not necessarily have to default to being the largest nationalist party and the largest unionist party if smaller nationalist and unionist parties and the middle can form a working coalition to deliver a programme. But important, irrespective of how you do it, both traditions need to have seats at the table.
Yeah, because it wouldn't. I mean, the whole agreement is based on having both sides of the divide. Terrible that we have to use those terms, but that both of them had to be there. It would be impossible to make progress if you didn't have unionists and nationalist parties there, and. I always believed, Chairman, even at the start when we did not have the Democratic Unionist Party there, that ultimately we're leaving out a large section of the community, maybe that were bigger later on, but that you had to try and find a way of bringing them in, because for Northern Ireland to work properly, you do need everybody to be part of it. Maybe if you ask me, we're talking about the bigger parties, but one of the things I regret was that the arrangement that we had for the smaller parties at the time, and not Alliance, but the smaller parties on the Democratic Unionist Party and the Progressive Unionist Party, Gary McMichael and David Irvine, were for that election before the Good Friday Agreement negotiations and the Women's Coalition, that we pitched it that they would, on a very small percentage of the vote, have representation. Now, I think it is certainly an arguable case that if we didn't do that and didn't have them there, we may not have been able to get the Good Friday Agreement through in the first place. And maybe we should have kept some of the, that representation, because there were a community that felt then that they weren't represented. Depends who you talk to from those areas, and I think that's it would have been maybe a better thing to have. It would have been, in my view, a better thing that they continued to have elected representation.
Okay. Carla, you indicated you want to come in. Claire, I think you've indicated as well. Okay. No, in which case, Carla Lockhart.
Okay, just a very brief comment, just to push a little bit more on what you've previously said. I think in 2017 you outlined that to end mandatory coalition would be crazy and dangerous. I think was the words that were used. And considering the calls in recent weeks, particularly from SDLP, Alliance, Sinn Féin, to move without unionist consent or exclusion of my party, would you still describe that as crazy and dangerous?
To
exclude the DUP, exclude the voice of unionism from any change to mandatory.
Well, I don't think if you're not going to get agreement if you don't have all sides involved. I mean, the agreement is based on the fact that you have everybody involved in the decision. But I don't think, like if you exclude somebody, the mandatory coalition was on the basis that that was the best way of getting agreements, that if everybody was in. If you leave people out, then they'll feel isolated.
Yeah, just a very quick
point. Sorry, Carla, anything else you want to come back?
No, a couple of others, but I'll come in.
Sorry,
no.
Well, I just want to clarify, I suppose you would differentiate between parties excluding themselves and parties being excluded by others, which I don't think anybody is suggesting.
No. If you exclude yourself, I mean, if you make a decision to be outside of it, people are entitled to do that and have done so under the agreement.
Yeah, and I think any of the proposals on the table around reform allow for people to choose not to be in, but for nobody to be excluded against.
I do feel, but for the foreseeable future, I didn't think I'd be saying this 25 years ago, but I do think I would rather people being in, because I just think you get a greater sense of agreement and inclusion helps the world in Northern Ireland.
Robert Cooper.
Thank you very much. You said earlier that no country has had its institutions down for so long. Although I think Belgium had a 589-day coalition negotiation, but given that it was once characterised to me that the Northern Ireland settlement is a bit like whatever the result of the election, you've got sort of Jeremy Corbyn and Jeremy Clarkson having to form an administration together, and in some ways the surprise is that they have had government for that long. But do you think that as the bloodstains fade, and as the politicians and new generations come through, do you think that it will be more and more difficult to get agreement, and that, in some ways, whether it be flags or Irish language, whatever, that the parties are looking for reasons to fall out, rather than looking for reasons to cooperate? And do you think in another 25 years we'll still have this same type of constitutional settlement for the institutions to operate?
Well, I sure hope it's not even in 5 years that we have that position. But it is maybe useful, or maybe it's not so useful, to remember that in those final weeks of the discussions, it was hard enough to convince some of the parties, and more than one, that the idea of a Stormont Assembly and an executive was the right way to go. Some of the parties didn't see it that way, and you know, we had to convince people that a local elected assembly was the right way to go, where they had control of their own position, and now nobody really talks about that now, but it was a big issue at the time, and it was the persistence of John Hume and Seamus Mallon, who had back to their earlier experiences of Sunningdale, which was 24 years earlier, believed to make this workable, that we should have institutions. And they had a job to convince parties on the nationalist side and the unionist side that this was the right way to go. And that's why I said to the chairman earlier on that it worries me if this goes into a drift. Do you go back to that position where people didn't really care if you had elected institutions? And I really would worry. I'm not saying if it's a matter of weeks or months, but if it was to drift on, that you go back into that mindset again, which would be very worrying.
So obviously the politicians are obliged to work together, but do you feel that the communities are coming close together or further apart because of the way things work? And is it, maybe won't it be until we actually get things like integrated education across the board that actually we'll see more of a sort of settled view about how things are going to work in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, no, I think for the foreseeable future, I'd love to live to see the day where you can have government and opposition in Northern Ireland and people can fight about issues. But I just think for now, it's too easy to get, you know, polarisation and division. So I think the stronger, I think there's an input certainly from the parties that they need to be together and working together for another period. And I think even internationally, it will look far better. I mean, the Belgium example isn't a great example. You know, they were just fighting about who was going to be Prime Minister. So in Northern Ireland, it's a bit it's different.
Mm. Would you agree that it's in some ways forced the political parties to become more polarised? So the UUP as opposed to the DUP as opposed to the UUP, and Sinn Féin in the ascendancy as opposed to SDLP, and it's actually this situation does tend to polarise politics in Northern Ireland?
It does, but I mean, I think that can happen. That can happen anywhere, particularly where you've
happened here.
Yeah, but you know, at least your electoral system kind of gives a clear-cut position. I mean, even in my jurisdiction, it's you know, you've multi-party, multi-seats. It's kind of you do get these more difficult positions. But I just think the fundamental point in this is that I think you're best having, as of now, not forever, but as of now, having representation from nationalism, republicanism, unionism, and loyalism working together, and I, as best they can. Of course, there'll be always political and ideological and policy differences, but I think for the foreseeable future, I think it's best that they're working together. Should that be the way forever? No, I don't think it should, but certainly to try and grow to the next stage. I mean, we've made huge progress, as I said at the outset, but the next phase of progress needs everybody there to bring that on, and hopefully that will happen.
Thank you.
And can they say again, I said I won't say anything about Brexit, but I mean, the one good thing, if we can find a solution to the protocol, is that Northern Ireland, has the huge advantage of being part of the UK internal market. Its relationship with the south of Ireland, which is growing all the time from a business point of view, and being in the single market. I mean, it's a phenomenal. I get tired myself of saying it to people from Northern Ireland, but it's a phenomenal opportunity for growth and stability and investment in Northern Ireland, and it's a huge opportunity if we can get across this side of the fence.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Robert. Bob Stewart.
Very nice to meet you, Mr. Ahern. I've never met you before, but a real pleasure. My question was rather big, actually, which was sort of, what were the difficulties of setting up North-South institutions? So I think that's such a big question. It covers everything. But I'm particularly interested in your observations on the interdependence between Strand 1 and Strand 2, setting up the institutions in Northern Ireland for local government, and Strand 2, which was fundamentally enabling that to happen. So my question really boils down to that. Can you just give me your observations on how that's worked?
Yeah, well, the intention was, and it was working very well, that members of the executive in the north, the key people, that they would meet the government in the south on regular basis and dealing with all island issues. Some of them specified, some of them unspecified, because there was the difficulty about implementation bodies. But it was to give you the example, say cancer care on the island of Ireland, that they would work on an all-island basis, and that agricultural issues, fisheries issues. So rather than just having differences of opinion, that we would sit down and try and make progress on an all-Ireland basis. And it worked very well. Now, the idea was that there would be regular meetings.
How regular would those meetings be?
At the start, we were meeting about every 10th week, so within a 3-month period. Yeah. And the full cabinet, or more or less the full cabinet, would meet the full executive in the north, discuss the fixed agenda, and then there were subgroups. Say there was an agricultural subgroup or a health subgroup, where it would just be the relevant minister responsible in the north, relevant minister responsible in the south, and they were working extremely well, working on an all-island basis, not talking about constitutional issues, just dealing with practical issues, whether it be education or health, and there was. I think there was a really the all-island energy market. I mean, there are so many examples of good progress that was being.
And this was a good thing, and presumably the officials on both sides, north and south, were in constant contact in between meetings.
All the time.
So this was something that was a really good thing set up.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, the whole idea of it was that it would be a progressive agenda, that. It wouldn't be limited to those items that had been agreed 25 years ago, that it could be on any issue. But it was very much on cooperation and seeing where we could exchange information, and it was working extraordinarily well.
I presume that was something quite easy to agree. Actually, it seems to make absolute sense. Is that your view?
Well, once you didn't specify the areas under, once you allowed the agenda to grow, there was a difficulty if you said these are the areas of North-South cooperation, and they were designated and formalised. If the agenda was just without, to be honest, after a few years, I think most of the ministers didn't realise the items that were designated or not designated. They were just dealing with the everyday issues, and it worked extremely well. Like the foot and mouth issue was an example where there was a huge threat to the agricultural economy north and south, and you know how big that is in the island of Ireland. And Bree Rogers was the minister in the north, Lake Joe Walsh in the south, and they worked absolutely cohesively, on dealing with foot and mouth, ignoring borders, ignoring Ireland, England, just dealing with the issue. and it worked really well. It does. You just reminded me of the point about the officials. One of the regrettable things, Chairman, that I should mention is that for all my years dealing at various councils in Europe for over, must have been 25 years, and the great cooperation there was between civil servants of the Republic of Ireland and the British civil service. They had built up extraordinarily good relationships. They were meeting at subcommittees, they were back and forward to Brussels, they were socialising together. When somebody was in trouble about something, they were able to tic-tac with each other. And that all ended with Brexit. So that daily and weekly cooperation of our officials, the permanent government, is gone. And it's I certainly regretted that, because I'd built up great contacts with so many, chancellors and so many ministers, and but that's gone across our systems, and the way. So it's no good bemoaning that, but the way of keeping that alive is the third strand, which we haven't discussed, which is the Intergovernmental Conference, where, and in fairness to the present Prime Minister, he attended the meeting just before Christmas, which I was delighted of, because unfortunately Prime Ministers in recent times hadn't attended, so there was no meetings. And it's not that the Prime Minister has to be there every month. I mean, I think even if there was 1 or 2 meetings a year, and that if other ministers met, because otherwise that connection between our systems is gone, that had been there for 45 years, and which I treasured as a minister. And I always found your civil servants and senior level, to be very helpful, cooperative. But that died a debt with Brexit. Totally died a debt, and that connection that had been built up over the years has totally gone. But the only way, I'm not saying this, it's as good as the old way, but at least the Intergovernmental Conference, which is the stranded Good Friday Agreement, if it's developed and evolved, then it can replace that loss of that contact.
It was John Hume who said what we really needed was practical cooperation between, and that was strand 2 fundamentally, wasn't it? That's what he was always banging on about, I seem to recall.
Well, as I said earlier on in reply to the question, if you had if John Hume or Seamus Mallon, who were the 2 key people, if there wasn't strand 2, the SDLP would not, and the Irish government would not have been in agreement.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bob. Let's turn now to Mary Kelly-Foy. Mary?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, nice to meet you. I think Bob's really, you've answered my question in the main. I guess I was going to ask to what extent you think that the Strand 2 institutions had succeeded in enabling cooperation, but are you, from the examples you've given, it looks as if has been quite a success. Are you saying that now with Brexit that's...
Well, it's Brexit on one side, but I mean the real problem is that the institution Strand 2 isn't operating at all because the institutions are down. But I think Strand 2, you get the ministers for the executive and the ministers from the South working together. It really can do good practical work without any difficulties.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, well, Mr. O'Neill, I think you largely answered my question on Strand 3, but from a unionist point of view, Strand 3 was always very important, wasn't it? And it was very much part of the way in which we, in 1998, the parties were able to come together. And I think from my perspective, it's been probably the least well known of the strands. If you ask sort of members of the public what the British Irish Council is, I don't think they would be able to tell you the first thing about it. Do you think that sort of perhaps underlines what is very much unfinished business and undeveloped business when it comes to the institutions in Strand 3? And I think you've already said that with Brexit, it's clearly become even more important if we're to have official level engagement. What more now can be done to embed that? We've had the Prime Minister coming to Blackpool for the recent council. Over and above ministerial engagement at a high level, what more can we now do to sort of embed and improve the way that Strand 3 operates?
Well, what I would like to see that the intergovernmental conference is that, say, if the Prime Minister and his officials were to attend maybe at least once or maybe twice a year. I mean, I understand the agenda for Prime Ministers, so I'm not, they don't have to be at every meeting, that's not necessary. But if there was kind of a quarterly meeting where it was the social departments, health and, maybe then another quarter where it was education, then where it was industrial, and that the relevant officials are at those meetings. I think that would replace what we'd lost. Now, there wouldn't be meeting as much, but then they could evolve, and there's no objection. I mean, that east-west strand is something that we had no difficulty with in the Irish government. In fact, it didn't matter when the UK were in the European Union, because I was meeting Tony Blair or Gordon Brown or whoever at several European Council meetings. But now there is no meeting. And then I saw some paper comments of saying, well, we need to invent something new. We don't need to invent anything new. It's there. It's part of the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement.
You've got the Scottish government, the Welsh government, the Channel Islands, well,
that's the British Irish Council,
Indeed. So on that side of it,
there's.
But so you've got the two institutions, haven't you? You've got the Intergovernmental Conference, and you've got the BIC as well.
Yeah. There's no reason why they can't be beefed up and can't be extended, and at least nobody could object to that. But I'd have to say, Chairman, maybe all ministers or prime ministers didn't see the relevance.
Yes, understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Stormont. Picking up on that, sorry, Colin, did you want to come in on that? Well, I've just dropped a note. We've got the Northern Ireland Budget Bill, you see, before us, and I've just dropped a note to the Speaker's office to say we're in committee, so I'm hoping for a degree of leniency. Do you have a question on?
One little question.
Yeah, because I've got a sum up question.
Yeah.
As long as it's. I'd encourage snappiness.
I'll try to be as snappy as possible. Obviously, I assume you would accept that the central principle underlying the Belfast Agreement and its successors is the absolute requirement from both sections of the community for any major decision that impacts on either community. So, can you tell me why having a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland would be a breach of the Belfast Agreement, but having one from Northern Ireland to the rest of the UK would not, in your opinion?
Well, I don't. The idea of border down the Irish Sea, I mean, I don't consider there's any border down the Irish Sea, and I know why people's fear about that. But I think what you need is a trade solution that deals with the UK internal market. Having a border on the island of Ireland is something that just nobody, I think, from any side or any party wants to see. I mean, it would be going back, generations, and so I never saw. Just to answer your question very clearly, I never saw the argument of having a no border on the island of Ireland. And then replacing that with a border down the Irish Sea. I mean, that was never, I don't agree with any border down the Irish Sea, but I believe is that we have to find a solution to the UK internal market issue. I mean, some people think that there's a line out in the Irish Sea and there's a guy in a little boat and a flag stopping big ships coming over. I mean, that is never for what was meant. Now, I accept that language was used and people started talking about it in Irish Sea, which was a disaster. But what we're talking about is having a frictionless border all round. And once there's a guarantee that the single market isn't being breached, that that products and goods are moving on or services moving on, then we have it. But it was never ever something that I think was, it might have been said, but never thought about, that you would replace the border across the land border of Ireland with the Irish Sea. I mean, the great thing is for the last 25 years that there is no border on the island of Ireland. Everyone is coming up and down. I can drive from Belfast to Dublin now, and I don't even see a security man doing traffic duty. So, and that's the way I like to keep it.
Let me bring this session to a close. We've had the Prime Minister's attendance, as you've mentioned. We had the Minister of State Baker apology, which was heartfelt and sincere, and my understanding is it went. It was received very well in Dublin. I'm hoping the answer, Mr. Ahern, to this question is yes. But would you agree with me that as a result of the trust, the friendship and the mutual respect being restored in our relationships, Anglo and Irish, that the governments are in a good position on a whole variety of issues to work well and collaboratively to deliver for the people of the island of Ireland?
I think, listen, trust, confidence, goodwill, trying to find solutions that gets us on into the next stage of development is the only way forward.
Thank you. And then my final question for this session is 25 years down the line. Now you're a seasoned practitioner of these things. What one thing did you think might have happened as a result of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which hasn't, but you'd still like to see?
Stability of institutions. I think it is of deep regret that we've had so many stop-starts with elected people not being able to carry out the job. And let's not get into the reasons, but there's been numerous reasons, unfortunately, for such prolonged periods. This was never envisaged. It was not. It was not something I ever thought we were putting to the people, and that leads to instability, and it leads to unnecessary rancour, and and ultimately it will damage the democratic position. If I could put it back the other way, because you could imagine if your election here in December 2019 had have led to a position now over 3 years on where you would have only met for less than a third of the time, you could imagine what people would be saying outside.
Oh yes, I think without a shadow of a doubt, and I think that sort of at a time of economic pressures and cost of living and all the rest of it, the committee, we were all in Northern Ireland last week, and I think coming through loud and clear was a delivery time now for people who need it, rather than and I mean, I think all of our hope is, I mean, if there's any silver lining in the horror cloud that is Ukraine, I mean, you sort of almost intimated it, is that it's contextualised the size of the problem, and if the sophisticated, mature statecraft of Brussels, Westminster, Dublin can't solve this, then I think we'd all have to begin to wonder what the hell are we all doing. But that might be for another day. Mr. Ahern, can I thank you? Busy schedule, I know. The committee's hugely grateful. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to hear your thoughts. And on behalf of the committee, thank you for all you've done over your active political life in helping get everything to at least where we are, which began the road of peace on the island of Ireland, which was long needed. So thank you very much indeed. Somebody's now making a personal statement in the Commons. I don't know what that's going to be. Quite interesting. What? Oh, is it? Order. Order. The pigeon, is it?